guys, Evan Rook here back with another video, and today we're going to be doing a review on the Bandai Showa Mothra Larva figure. So this is another figure I got from Christmas of this year. Unlike the previous figures, this is not a newly released figure. This is a vintage figure, because I believe besides the Darth Vader, all the other figures I reviewed so far are newly released Bandai figures, but this is not. This is a vintage figure made in 1998. And I definitely think it's really, really nice. I think there's a lot of things to admire about this. One of the biggest pros I have with this figure is first and foremost the paint job. This might come as a surprise because this really only has one color, and I am not a fan of figures that have one color, even if it's accurate to the design, because it doesn't leave room for booming colors, but the shading is what makes this really, really nice. So even though there's no booming colors and there's primarily just one color, it still doesn't distract from the fact that it's good because of the shading. Examples of really good shading are the light brown colors right here around the face. Of course, this is mainly a darkish brown, but I like how they transition throughout the face to a light brown back to a dark brown. It really is really nice. I guess you could say that the light blue eyes, even as small as it is, does technically count as a booming color, but I'm again more focused on the shading here. More examples of shading are here. We can see this also light brown color, not this type of light brown color, it's a different type of brown. I'd like to say more of a pinkish brown. That is the underbelly, or at least the outline of the underbelly, while everything else remains the primary dark brown color. Now again, it's not an ecstatic pro. This is definitely a good pro, definitely above average. So let's get into the next thing I like about this figure. So the next pro I have with this figure is the detail. Now you might look at this and think there's not much detail, and that's one of the reasons why it wasn't the main pro. I still think it's fairly above average, but the reason why the detail is not at average or slightly above average, but is I think fairly above average, is because of facial detail. The facial detail on this is actually really, really nicely done. I especially enjoy a lot of the wrinkles we see here. We see a lot of them around the face area. Right here, these little indents right here. I also think the indents are done very nicely. These kind of overlapping flappy skin, which is kind of like what Mothra Larva has. Kind of like here with the bumps. I know that's not really something you can credit the detail for, but I guess you kind of can in the sense that you know, you can feel it almost when you rub against it. I also like some of the light feather detail on the underbelly here. We have a lot of that both on, you know, on both sides here. These little tiny things that you can definitely credit for, but of course it's not as noticeable because it's on the underbelly of the figure. So again, fairly above average, right? So let's get into the cons of this figure. When it comes to the cons of this figure, as you might expect, it is the articulation. And Bandai figures, as I've always said, should at least have 4 joints of articulation, at least 4. This has not 4, not 3, not 2, but 1. And in case you're curious as to where that is right here. Right here, this pretty much where the head and the rest of the body separates, the cutting off point of that. I think this is genuinely concerning because there should have been more areas of articulation besides this. I mean, what is this? That goes into a con of itself, by the way, that I'm going to explain in a bit, but there should have been a lot more. I believe there's no real reason why you shouldn't have had a joint of articulation in between. I'd like to say every 2 humps would have been fair. So a joint here, a joint here, a joint here, maybe here where the very tip of the tail goes, maybe a small detail where the beak moves. I mean, it really could have had a lot of more chances. That would have been at least, what, like 5 joints of articulation? That would have been above average, and that would have been a major pro. Instead, it's a major con. As per the second con, which again is technically the same as amount of a con in terms of how many points I'm taking off as the first con about how there's little to no articulation. I still think the original con matters more, but this con equally in terms of points that I'm taking off matters just as much, and that is the stiffness of the single joint of articulation. What I mean by that is there's one joint of articulation, but even that one joint is extremely stiff. Now, of course, it wouldn't make sense for it to go 360 because Mothra Larva isn't designed like that. That's just literally impossible for Mothra Larva to pull off. But even then, they could have had at least move a little bit more than this. What is this? So I think that is definitely something that I really think they could have done a better job with. Articulation was really not well done on this. So without a further ado, guys, I'm going to be rating this figure a 8 out of 10. I believe personally that this is a really good figure, a classic good vintage Showa Mothra Larva Bandai figure. I really, really do. But the articulation, I mean, it just took away from so much potential that this figure had. It could have been well over a 9 out of 10. But anyways, guys, I hope you enjoyed this review. Like, comment, subscribe. See you guys later, and bye-bye.